The City of Tigard Budget Committee is now reconvened. Before we begin, for any citizen members listening to this meeting, if you would like to provide written testimony, do so now by emailing Lizbeth at tigard/oregon.gov or call in and talk live to the committee members at 503-966-4101. Tonight's goal is to approve the City of Tigard budget. As a reminder, please be sure to mute your mic when you are not speaking. When you do wish to speak, please state your name before making comments or questions. First item on the agenda is to make sure we've got everybody present. I'm going to do a real quick roll call. Siobhan, Ms. Chandler,
I'm present.
Counselor Anderson.
Here.
Mr. Bentz.
I'm here.
And Counselor Lube.
I'm here.
Member Cadman.
Present.
Counselor Goodhouse.
Here.
Member Voigt.
Here.
Mayor Snyder.
Here.
And Counselor Newton.
Here.
Okay, thank you very much. First item is approval of the minutes from the May 16th meeting. Are there any additions or changes to the summary minutes from that meeting?
Chair Roan, this is Counselor Newton.
Yes, ma'am.
I know Gordy Winterroad, one of the people that spoke, one of the members of the public that called in. So I wanted to provide the correct spelling of his last name.
Okay, Liz, do you have that? Or are you ready to go?
Go ahead.
It's WINTERROWD, Winterroud, 2 R's. Thank you.
Any other corrections or additions, comments? I had one. The page 2 ends abruptly with an incomplete sentence and goes right into page 3, starting item number 2, public comments. Were there things to be added there, Ms. Newton or Lutz, or do we need to get a correction someplace?
I will make the correction. It's one sentence I see that I didn't put in there.
Okay.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Anything else? If not, is there a motion to approve the summary minutes with the changes to be made per Ms. Lutz?
Counselor Newton, I move approval of the summary minutes with the changes suggested.
Thank you. Is there a second?
This is Tim Cadman. I second.
Thank you. Liz, please take a roll call vote and note members approving by when they say yes and any opposition when they say no.
Siobhan Chandler,
Yes.
Counselor Anderson,
Yes.
Chris Bentz,
Yes.
Counselor Lube,
Yes.
Tim Cadman,
Yes.
Counselor Anderson, Goodhouse,
Yes.
Leah Voigt,
Yes.
Mayor Snyder,
Yes.
Clifford,
Yes.
and Counselor Newton.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you all very much. We will begin now with the public comment section. Liz, have there been any phone-in comments?
I don't know if there are phone-in comments. I think Keelan is monitoring that, but there are no written comments at this time.
Okay, please keep us apprised as we move along if someone does join late and has a public comment. If they do, we will provide the instructions at that point. Is that okay?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I guess this is Mike. I'm curious, at this time, there are no callers. How long would you like to keep the line open for incoming calls?
Well, it seemed like it took about 45 minutes, if I remember right, on the May 16th meeting. Do we want to allow that kind of leeway or not? What's the general consensus? Just
I will say on the budget notice for the meeting, we said call in between 6:15 and 6:30, but we're available to leave it open as long as you would like.
Then if there are no objections, let's say we'll give them another 15 minutes until 6:50 to call in.
Chair Roan, it's Councilor Newton. The
Yes,
agenda
ma'am.
says that we're taking testimony from 6:40 to 7:10. If this is a published agenda, you might want to consider leaving it until 7:10.
Okay, that's a good point that you raise, and I apologize, the agenda I have doesn't have specific times on it. So if that's something, that agenda is someplace that the public can get a hold of, then we should abide by that. Pardon? Could someone please give me a clarification on that?
Mr. Roan, this is Toby LaFrance, Finance and Information Services Director. The agenda that is posted online does have time frames, and it does say that in anticipation that we would receive calls between 6:15 and 6:30, that public comment would last a half an hour from 6:40 to 7:10. So both timeframes were posted, both in terms of when to call in, and then on the agenda we allowed for a half an hour. So it's up to the chair as to whether or not we want to leave the phone lines open through that time frame, or stick to the posted call-in times, which ended at 6:30.
Well, I think considering the confusion that a lot of people can have with the electronics today and these kinds of meetings, that in fairness, we ought to leave it open until 7:10, unless somebody has a severe objection to that.
This is Tim Cadman. I concur. I think you leave it open.
If anyone has an objection, please raise that now. Otherwise, we'll assume that we're going to 7:10.
And Mike, were able to accommodate that?
Yeah, yes, absolutely.
Okay,
We'll
thank you.
close the phone lines at 7:10.
Okay.
Clifford, could I,
Yes, ma'am.
this is Liz.
Yes.
Could I just give my email address one more time? It's LIZ, for anyone listening, LIZBETH@tigard-or.gov. And I have emailed you, Clifford, times of agenda items.
Okay. Then give me a second to go find that email and the updated times.
So Cliff, if we want to start with the follow-up, and then if a public comment comes in, we could interject that if that would work.
Sounds good. Okay, thank you, everyone. Then let's go to the follow-up and discussion items from the May 16th Budget Committee meeting. Unless there is something to be interjected before that, we can start with the levy results. And Chief McAlpine and Marty Wine, please let us know what we should expect now that the levies have been approved.
Well, this is Chief Captain McAlpine, Police Chief for Tigard, and Marty has been gracious enough to let me have a few minutes here. First and foremost, I just would like to express my sincere appreciation and gratitude for our community members for supporting the police levy. I also want to recognize the council, the PAC, and the Bond Levy Task Force for all their efforts, as well as city staff. The police department may be the ones who benefit most, but this was clearly a citywide initiative, and we would not have been successful without all the other city staff that put a lot of sweat equity in this as well. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Business Manager Lisa Shaw, who's going to go over the actual levy budget impacts.
Hi, can everybody hear me?
Yes, Lisa.
Great. Hi, this is Lisa Shaw, Business Manager for Tigard Police. In this proposed budget, now that the levy has passed, we have a package that totals $2.2 million in terms of appropriation just for the fiscal 21 budget year. This includes the personnel costs for the 9 officers, as you're aware, 8 patrol, 1 school resource officer, and 2 non-sworn police support staff. Those personal services, salaries and benefits, that's $1.3 million. We also have the crisis and de-escalation, crisis intervention and de-escalation training for a little over $92,000. Supplies and equipment to support the staff, that's the ongoing, about $86,000. And then we also have one-time equipment costs, guns, furniture, computers, and vehicles to support this staff. As you can see, that's a little over $260,000. And then in terms of indirect charges, as the police department grows, we require more support services from the central services, and we will need to be able to expand. We're going to be taking more services, and so in order to expand to accommodate that, there'll be some increases, temporary increases in human resources, and ongoing increases in information technology and design and communications. And that's, as you can see, just under $490,000. So you will see this will start our budget in July, and then as we go through the year, we'll be tracking our actual expenditures to budget. Does anybody have any particular questions for me?
This is Chair Roan. I'll start off, Liz. Lisa, what do you expect the timing of this additional 2.2 million to be in terms of starting the expenditures? Because it takes time to hire people, it takes time to acquire these vehicles and so forth. If you were to look at a cash flow on this 2.2 million and go through June 30th of 2021, how much of this do you expect would actually be spent?
Sure, that's a great question, because the appropriation for the budget is an annualized amount, as you've picked up on.
Right.
However, our actual expenditures will be on a prorated basis. And I know the chief can talk a little bit more about logistics in terms of the hiring plan in sort of broad strokes, but I will tell you that the expense model that finance and I worked on specifically for this, we likely will not spend the 2.2 million in fiscal 21. Much of that, there are factors that are beyond our control in terms of, we can plan that we believe we will hire officers and support staff at a certain point in time, but we don't really know until that recruitment process starts. I think it's fair to say that probably we would spend, right now our estimate is about 1.6 million, but I want to caution you to say that that's an estimate that was just based on knowing that we would not have everybody hired and we would not purchase all equipment at the beginning of July. So we'll have to monitor as we go along, but I think it's safe to say we will not spend the full 2.2 million. But we are counting on that. We did build that into our model in terms of the funds that we don't spend will be recaptured, and that will help fund portions of the levy, or will go into our fund balance reserves for a later time. I hope that answers your question.
It does, Lisa, thank you. Though what I'm really looking for is, given that the projected revenue for between now and June 30th is roughly, as you say, $600,000 more than what the anticipated costs are going to be, is there the possibility that we could use that 600,000 someplace else in the general fund? And I'll get into that a lot later, but you mentioned carryover, but there's more money to come from the levy in the 21-22 fiscal period.
So, and I think what's a couple of important things, and Toby, please step in as needed. We have to be really careful about what we spend these funds on, and we may only spend these funds on that which we told the voters that we would spend them on, and that's very specifically for this list of personnel, support staff, equipment, and training. So we're really not at liberty to spend that on something that that is outside of that scope. And we built into the model that we would not spend the full 2.2 million. So we have already reallocated that to other parts of the levy, whether that's in future years of the levy, or so for example, we would build up the fund reserve and then we will have to use it, but it must be specifically only for these items. And it's important that we appropriate at the 2.2 million because we are hiring full staff. So we don't know exactly when they will start, but each FTE, each staff person costs a certain amount for the entire year at an annualized amount. So it is the correct budgetary procedure for us to budget for that whole amount. And then as the actuals come in, we'll see, well, what will we be able to draw into our local option levy fund reserves? But we must use it only for these purposes. Toby, do you feel like that was a good enough explanation?
So this is Toby LaFrance, Finance and Information Services Director. Thank you, Lisa. Yes, just to support what Lisa was saying, the City of Tigard will only spend levy dollars on the items that were included in the levy. Where we have revenues that exceed expenditures in the first few years, we will need those in the last few years of a 10-year horizon. So we sized the amount of the property tax levy so that the City of Tigard can stay at 29 cents per thousand for the next decade.
Thank you both very much. That's a very complete answer, and I hope the public reads the minutes of this meeting so that they understand that there's not a $600,000 slush fund come June 30th that the city spent elsewhere.
No, sir. We very deliberately planned that in our model because we knew for certain that we would not have everybody hired by July 1st. So that is in fact built into our model, and we expect to use all of those funds for exactly these purposes. Yep.
Good. Thank you very much. That was the questions that I had. Anybody else?
This is Leah Voigt. I was hoping to get some clarification. Budget Committee was sent an email, and I apologize for not clarifying before the meeting, stating that the increased property tax revenue due to the levy was expected to be $2 million, but there was an added $2.2 million to the police department budget, and I was wondering about that extra kind of $0.2 million in terms of where did it come from, and why is it there, and how is it being funded?
Director LaFrance, I believe that might be a question for you.
Sure, absolutely. This is the difference between budgeting the full staffing as if they're here for 12, like that every staff person is here for 12 months, and recognizing the fact that we will be phasing in the staff as we can hire them. So there will be salary savings, and that will make up the difference between revenues and expenditures.
Thank you.
Ms. Chandler?
Yeah, this was my question. I just wanted to clarify, are the two other bullet points here, the crisis de-escalation training at 92K and supplies equipment 86K, those were built into the 2.2, is that correct?
Correct. Correct.
Great, thank you.
Councilor Anderson?
No questions, Cliff.
Thank you. Mr. Bentz?
Nothing here. Thanks.
Thank you. Councilor Lube?
None for me, thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Cadman?
I am all set. Thank you.
Good. Councilor Goodhouse?
No questions. I just like to just restate what was said, that and I'm glad that was stated, that these funds can only be used for what the voters approved and designated for. I know during the campaign we heard a lot about that, and so it was good, and that was brought up, and that was stated that those can only be used for what's in there, and when a levy is done, it's basically a contract that has to be done by those areas only. So I appreciate that response.
Ms. Voigt, anything else?
No further questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Mayor Snyder?
No questions, Cliff.
Thank you. Councilor Newton?
I have no questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, everyone. There was a question holding over from the May 16th meeting about police overtime and photo enforcement. We all received a memo from Chief McAlpine and Lisa Shaw. Is there anything to add to that, or is there part of that you want to explain and make sure that we understand?
Chair Roan, if I may, this is Chief McAlpine again. We actually had a slide number 2 on the levy, which actually talked and reminded people about what the services are. And if I could go ahead and just cover that real quick, and then we'll be happy to answer any questions with the photo enforcement and police overtime.
Please go ahead.
Thank you. Again, as Business Manager Shaw illustrated, we will hire 8 additional patrol officers to respond to increased calls for service. We're going to respond to multiple emergencies at the same time and enhance community patrols. So once we get everybody onboarded through the academy and trained, and that they can now be considered on their own, this is what we're going to focus on, is deploying our resources in a broader capacity throughout the city. We're going to hire 1 additional school resource officer, and that officer will be assigned to
Chief McAlpine, we lost you.
Trees and make sure they have some touch points. Do you hear me now?
We can, thank you.
Okay. Did you lose me through all of it?
No, you were just past the hiring the school resource officer.
Oh, perfect. Okay, thank you. And again, those that the school resource officers in the middle school will also have a touch point with the elementary school kids as well. And then our goal is to get to those priority 1 and 2 calls, or we call them emergency calls, to get them below that 6 minutes. And ideally, I'd like to see us at 5 minutes. I think that is a very stretch goal, but I think it's one that we should shoot for. And then lastly, as stated, we want to train all of our sworn officers in advanced crisis intervention and de-escalation to address those increased mental health crises that we see every single day. Where we are challenged, as you know, is both in the hiring and the training right now under COVID, because the training, this is the type of training that needs to be hands-on, some scenario-based. So we want to make sure that we're in the phase 2 or 3 that allows us to have in-house training. And then with the hiring, so next week we will do a deep dive into our actual implementation plan for the entire levy. That'll be a robust recruitment, performance measures and metrics, and communication plan as well. You can expect that I will be reporting out our progress monthly to the council as part of my executive dashboard, and we'll also do quarterly reports that we can publish on our website as well, so that everybody sees exactly how we're doing and the transparency. And with that, I'll be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you very much. I will just let people talk in turn unless there are 3 or 4 at once. Does anybody have any follow-up questions for Chief McAlpine? Thank you very much. Hearing none, let's move on to item 3 in the agenda, the Parks Maintenance Memo from Mr. Rager and Mr. Barrett.
Good evening, Budget Committee. Brian Rager, Public Works Director. Thanks for giving us additional time tonight to talk to you about our park maintenance issue. I have with me Joe Barrett, our business manager, and he and I can answer questions a little bit later if you've got them. I hope you've had time to take a look at the memo we provided to you, and my intent here is just going to be to go over some key points from that memo, and please feel free to interrupt me along the way if you have questions. There were some questions at the last meeting related to when new parks would come on board for the department, and would that change at all our forecasting for the 3 positions that we have asked for. I want to clarify that since last year at this time, we've added 28 acres so far. That's the Lasage property. And another 8 acres are just knocking at the door, and I'll talk about those here in a minute, but they are listed in the memo. On the Lasage property, of the 28 acres, we're maintaining 7 of those acres right now, and we're maintaining those acres at what we would refer to as a level 2 maintenance effort. We've got some neighbors next to that property that we're conscientious about, and we want to make sure that that property doesn't look bad next door. Very soon, in April of 2021, the rest of the property, the rest of the 28 acres, will be ours to maintain. And right now, a contractor is taking care of that because there's a large project taking place, and we've allowed the contractor to stage some materials and equipment there. So in exchange for that, they are taking care of the 21 acres. So by April, we'll take all of it, and the 21 acres will be maintained at a level 3. So what I'm saying here is that there is, even though the park is undeveloped, there is still acres for us to maintain. I also want to point out that last year at this time, we offered up 2 budget packages last year. The first one was, how do we get ourselves staffed up to take care of the acreage we had at this time last year? And that was what the budget committee approved. And so we have brought on those 2 FTE that you approved, but that only brought us up to where we were last year. We forecasted what we would need for fiscal 20, what we're in now and beyond, but that one was not approved. So in looking at our need, we've got essentially 36 acres that we talk about in the memo, and inside of that 36 acres is River Terrace. And the memo, or the second budget package we put forth last year, we entitled River Terrace Parks. And the reason for that, we put such emphasis on that, is that those parks are going to require a very high level of maintenance. And if you've been out there, you might see that they are very nice. They've got a lot of amenities that many of our other community and neighborhood parks do not have. So our interim park manager, Martin McKnight, who's been our supervisor for many years, he's looking at those parks as requiring a level 1+ effort. And I can add more detail to that if you would like. We also expect that although Universal Plaza will not likely be ours to maintain until fiscal 22, we are going to need to be a part of the design effort as that goes into planning and design this fall and winter. And so that we also see as an opportunity to have the new supervisor be a part of that team. So having 2 supervisors will enable us the ability to make sure we have someone with the level of expertise in park maintenance to be part of that kind of team. There was a question, so back on the phased approach question, we did look at that, and honestly, in looking at what we're taking on, it does drive the need for the 2 utility workers that we've got in there. And, we've had a span of control issue regarding supervision, and that was pointed out in the performance audit. Further, we are now bringing on our summer seasonals. We held off on that for a while based on the COVID response, and we had kept our dog parks closed and some other things, but we're starting to open those things up. And like your lawns at home, everything's growing. So our park folks are getting behind. So we do need to bring the seasonals on, which drives that span of control issue. I did mention in the memo that if the budget committee felt like we needed to do some level of phasing, the one place I could see is the supervisor position. And my thinking there is that it's not like we can bring a supervisor on immediately July 1, although we would like to. It does take time to recruit, and if we had to hold off on one for a time, that's why I offered that one as a possibility. It's not my preference, but I just wanted you to understand what my thinking was there. We didn't talk about funding in the memo, and I know that it's tricky with the park and recreation program being split funded between general fund and the park and recreation fee. And I also know that the committee and the council may not want to increase the park and recreation fee right now, given our response to the pandemic. So we've offered a solution, and that would be paying for the first year of these positions with fund balance or in the park utility fund. Not a typical approach, but given the situation with the COVID response, it is a viable solution. We've also analyzed the fund and feel confident that it could handle a year of those costs. However, we would need to increase the park and recreation fee July of next year, and the estimate there is about $1.37 per EDU. So to summarize, just the resources we got last year brought us current with where we were last year. We have additional acreage we're taking on this year and next, and that is why it is driving the need for the 3 positions. And the park utility fund can pay for that for the first year.
Cliff, I've got a question if I could. I think you said go ahead. This is Tim Cadman. So last year, I believe I did vote for us to spend the money on the parks. With the state that we're in here with COVID, I'm likely going to change my position when I vote this year. I want to give some context, and if I've got my facts wrong, do please correct me. Before I head into this, though, I don't know if anybody saw the news that came in last night at the state level. We've had more than 400,000 Oregonians file unemployment since the COVID crisis began in mid-March. And state economists are currently, they've announced that 2020-2021 revenue is going to be about $2.7 billion below previous expectations for the fiscal year. This is all driven by COVID-19 and primarily due to the loss of income tax revenue. Governor Brown has asked the state agencies to submit plans for budget cuts up to 17%. I'm a little bit concerned that we're putting more money into the plan. It appears that we're expecting, I think it's a 9% growth in our overall revenues and a 4% growth in the general fund. I got to tell you, I don't think that's going to happen. And I think we need to have a plan B in the event that we see a significant precipitate drop in our revenues. And I think that starts by being really, really careful about putting any additions into the budget this year. So for me, that's kind of a backdrop. With that in mind, I still don't understand the rationale as to why we annexed what is currently an island that we now call part of our Tigard residential community. It's not contiguous to Tigard. It baffles me, and I if somebody can help me understand that offline or another day, that would be great. But having said that, and Mr. Rager, listening to your testimony about these, I believe there's 7 parks over 500 acres in River Terrace that they are really, really nice. I don't, in good conscience, I don't know that I can vote to have the residents of the Metzger neighborhoods be voting to take care of Tier 1 parks in River Terrace. It just doesn't feel fair to me. And I don't believe we've got the same density of parks throughout the city, nor the same level of really nice parks throughout the city. There have been other communities, San Diego County for one. When new communities go in, those particular neighborhoods have to pay for their infrastructure for a number of years before they pay the same rates as everybody else. They have to fund their new amenities, and that's something I'm a little confused why we don't consider that as a potential
Unknown
option.
participant is now
but
exiting.
For those reasons, I don't intend to vote to have this included in the budget tonight.
Thank you, Mr. Cadman. We'll go down the list for additional comments. Ms. Chandler.
Cliff, can I make a response real quick about to answer his question about the annexing of park in?
Please go ahead, Councilor Goodhouse.
Decades ago, Cook Park was in a similar situation where it was brought in. It was purchased by the city, but it was outside the city boundaries. And as growth came around, then that park became relevant to the city of Tigard, and that's similar for the Lasage property, where with future growth, that's going to be a key part of Tigard. So that's where it came available. We used with park bond money and it's something for our future strategies, looking out at something that's going to be used and tie into the rest of the city of Tigard, that's outside the urban growth boundary, but will be Tigard later on.
I don't think that's his question, Council President Goodhouse. I think his question's about why did we annex River Terrace to begin with?
Oh, maybe it was that. I thought it was why we buy a park that wasn't part of Tigard, but.
No, it was why
Tim,
we
can
annexed
you
River
clarify?
Terrace to begin with. Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so
fault.
some of that, I mean, just to quickly respond to that, you know, decisions around that were made before anyone on the current council was involved. Some of us were involved in, you know, making some of the steps happen, but that was planned at the county level sometime, you know, before by quite a bit, that's how that development was going to happen. We can argue about whether it was the right thing or not, but it had been planned for quite some time to become urban.
This is Siobhan. Could I get a little bit of context around River Terrace? I guess I'm not super familiar with where it is. I live near the library, and I'd love to get a sense of, is this high dollar housing for which we are providing high dollar parks? Is this low dollar housing for which we are providing high dollar parks? I guess I want to get a better sense of this community that might help inform my decision around the parks.
Does anyone have a specific response for Siobhan?
I think it is City Manager Wine, is our Community Development Director on today? Because that would be a good question for him potentially to answer. Or I guess the other thing we could discuss is whether Toby wants to describe the financing plan for that area, since it's you know, relatively unique. Because it's not, I mean, to the point that was asked earlier about financing of it, you know, it was not, they are paying more than other areas for certain parts of their services.
Mr. Chair, and Mr. Asher is on the meeting. So, Mr. Asher, do you feel okay about providing an overview of what River Terrace is about, or do you want to share? Okay.
If it's okay with the chair.
Please go ahead.
Hi, everybody. Kenny Asher, Community Development Director. I'll give the briefest of overviews. For anybody who doesn't know, River Terrace is about 500 acres on the western edge of the city, south of Shoals Ferry and along Roy Rogers Road. It's the fastest growing part of the city. This was pretty much farmland that was brought into the urban growth boundary and then brought into the city in the early 20-teens with the idea that it would be developed for new housing primarily. There'll be a small commercial area out there as well, along with a school. But it is generally, I would say, higher end housing, not entirely. There is some attached housing that's being built now, some multifamily, but really all new construction in this housing market comes in because it's new at or above, generally above market values. The parks that were built alongside all of that housing, as Public Works Director Rager said, are nicer than what are in some other parts of the city. They were funded by the developer through SDC credits and maintained by the development community for the first, I think it's been 3 to 5 years, but they do revert back to the city, and that's what the Public Works Director is trying to plan for. So just that, those are the broad strokes of River Terrace. There are thousands of people living there now and thousands more to come. It's a rapidly developing part of the city.
Thank you, Mr. Asher. Ms. Chandler, do you have follow-up regarding the history and background of River Terrace?
That's very helpful. I really appreciate the background. I do tend to lean a little bit towards where Tim is going, which is these are folks with money buying brand new homes that are expensive. And then we've got folks in Metzger who get crappy parks, but those rich people get nice parks. I guess I feel like we need to think about some level of equity as we contemplate how we maintain our parks. I'm hearing a level 2 for all other parks and level 1 plus, not just level 1, but 1 plus for these new homes. And I guess I want to think about equity. If we could address that, that would be great.
Thank you very much. I'm going to skip to the other citizen members, if you don't mind, and on this issue, and then we'll roll back to council members. That's okay? Mr. Bentz.
Yeah, I'll just run through my thoughts real quick. I also echo the idea that I don't want lower income folks to be subsidizing richer folks. It doesn't feel right. But yeah, that feels more specific. So looking just bigger picture at Tiger as a whole, we spend about half of what the national average is. So that makes us, I kind of look at that as we're twice as efficient as the national average. That's very optimistic, because really that's an unsustainable rate. So anyway, I just want to say that we're doing great with what we got, but I don't think that's sustainable.
Thank you, Mr. Bentz.
A couple of minutes too.
Oh, please, go ahead.
Yeah, so for the COVID issue, so we are expecting hits to our income coming up. Right now we have a very clear funding stream for parks, so it feels responsible to attack that now, get the income while we know we have it. It's a clear stream. It's on your bill. Everyone knows what it is. And let me see what else I got. Yeah, just looking at my bill, the PARF is still by far the smallest. So, not extra dollar, what was it, $1.35, $1.52. That doesn't feel like a huge hit to me. But that's just my personal bill, so everyone else can chime in there. So that's really it for me.
Thank you, Mr. Bentz. Ms. Voigt.
I don't have any additional questions at this time. Thank you.
Okay, Councilor Anderson.
Hi, Cliff. Yeah, just a few comments. River Terrace isn't for rich folks. I don't like that narrative. It's a lot of family wages out there. The parks are designed a little bit different than in a lot of different parts of the city because of the density. The houses are closer together, so the parks are more important really for the communities out there, and they're used quite a bit. And they are nice, and they have the top end playground equipment, and they look real nice. So it's a different type of park than we mentioned in Metzger, and make sure that we're not talking about unincorporated Washington County, Metzger. But I get your point. I just wanted to make that clear. Other than that, I have no questions for Mr. Rager.
Thank you, Councilor Anderson. Councilor Lube?
Hi, yes, I understand and I sympathize with a lot of the thought process. I'm incredibly torn as far as what to do in this situation. I think our parks are on board and they're here, and we need to manage them and deal with them and continue to maintain them. I hear the concern, and I echo the concern that these parks are more high maintenance. I think maybe that's something we should look at in the future if we are working with these developers to create these parks. Is there a way that the city can be more involved in the standards? And so we are a little bit better prepared as far as what we are going to be maintaining when they're turned over. I'm struggling with how to finance it and how to figure it out. I certainly understand and appreciate going into the reserve, but I'm hesitant to say, especially with the COVID situation and people's personal situations and everything going on, that we will use the reserve this year and raise the fee next year. I feel like that's pigeonholing the budget committee for next year to make those decisions. And I'm also against raising the fee for this year. I think as a council, or at least, for me, it was incredibly important to try to assist as many community members as possible, which is why we are holding off raising utility rates. While it's not a huge amount, it's enough to help out and make a difference. There are utility credits. And so it just feels like we would be doing the immediate opposite of what we're trying to accomplish with helping community members by turning around and raising the parks fee in order to get this done. So I think we're between a rock and a hard place where these parks are here and we need to maintain them and figure it out. But I'm struggling with how do we fund it? The general fund is a really difficult thing. And, is there something else we can look at? Is there somewhere else we can get this from or shift things around? That's what I'm struggling with.
Thank you, Councilor Lube. Mayor Snyder.
I think this is a point of, it's a difficult thing to balance. Other people have pointed that out. I struggle with the idea that we're going to end up with an asset that we potentially are going to let decline, but that's what we've done all over the rest of the city. And I'm not sure why River Terrace should be any different. And houses are close together in other parts of the city too. There's certainly, some of them are certainly close in River Terrace and dense, but that's not the only place in the city that's like that. And so I think this, I'm not sure I have a perfect answer here, but I'm certainly sympathetic to the concerns that have been raised.
Thank you, Mayor Snyder. Councilor Newton.
I just muted myself, sorry. I just have a couple of questions for clarification and then a couple of comments. So Mr. Rager, we're looking at two utility workers, and a supervisor. And it looks like, I guess for clarification, are we saying that we would need essentially 1 FTE for River Terrace, the utility workers two, and 1 for the other parks that are coming on? Is that what we're saying, including Universal Plaza? I'm a little unclear.
Sure. It's likely that. I'm sorry.
Or does it work that way? I'm confused.
Well, it roughly works that way. Will we devote 1 FTE to River Terrace? Hard to say, but we're going to devote quite a bit of an FTE to River Terrace. And I guess I want to not get too focused on River Terrace. I know I made an emphasis of that in my comments, but there are definitely other parks that require our attention. I didn't mention Dirksen Nature Park. That is a park that has developed and continues to get activated this year, and we are seeing a higher level of demand for our maintenance folks there. So any new park that gets built in the city, it gets the right attention, and I want to make sure that folks don't think that River Terrace parks are the only level ones. I mean, we consider Cook Park a level 1 and Summer Lake Park a level 1. I mentioned the comment from our park supervisor because the River Terrace community was envisioned to be something special, a community of distinction. And so if you drive out there, it was really designed that way. But the fees that the developer paid for the building of the parks. So what we're trying to do with the maintenance part is to all we're trying to do is point out that if you build new parks, whether it's from a developer or whether it's a city-built park, yeah, we have to think about the maintenance, or else we are essentially setting ourselves up to where we were prior to last year, where we're always behind, and that quality of parks will go down without the right resources to maintain.
Okay, one more question and then a couple of comments. On the supervisor, you said that would be the one position you'd be willing to defer. I'm a little concerned though, if we're going to ramp up for the summer season, and looks like we're going to have to pay different attention to the parks due to COVID. I'm a little concerned about not having that supervisor. However, I noticed there's some budget request to bring the former parks manager back. Does that help with? Would that help with this span of control issue we have this summer?
Not really. What we're hoping to do with bringing the former park manager back would be just a very part-time, focused on helping us. Well, before COVID hit, we were thinking we would bring him back for a little bit of contract work to help us recruit for the next manager. But also there's some park SDC work that needs to be done, and Steve Martin was very knowledgeable about how all of that works. So that would be a little piece of work that we would bring him back for, but not to oversee and supervise crews.
Okay. And my comments then are similar to what other folks have said. I'm very concerned about, the sustainability of the maintenance of our parks. We have voter approved land purchases of parks. We're trying to keep them up. We don't want to fall too far behind. But I'm concerned about, this is an ongoing expense, and I'm concerned about the approach, given where we are with the COVID, to take the position that we're depending on an increase in the park fee on July 1st, 2021, where we don't know where we're going to be, at that point. So to use the park utility fund now on one hand isn't a bad idea, but since it's depending on a future decision we're not sure we can make, that's my struggle. Again, I recognize that there's a need here. So another question I would have is, are we in a position, I'm concerned about the supervisor position, but are we in a position where we could do what the performance audit recommended, which is looking at our preventive and routine maintenance, and then look at our staffing needs in another 6 months or so, and maybe we'll have a better sense of where we are with general fund, parks, utility, and all that. I just am really concerned about, as Councilor Luke mentioned, making a commitment to raise a fee. We're just not sure, we're not sure that's going to be able to happen in July. So that's my concern. How we fund it.
If I could respond to your question about the preventative maintenance part, the reference in the performance audit, as I recall, I don't have it in front of me, but that was the recommendation was to make sure that the preventative maintenance measures we're doing wind up getting put into our computerized maintenance management system, so that they are right now what happens is the supervisor keeps a schedule of all of the preventative maintenance activities and parks. He keeps it on a Excel spreadsheet, and the Matrix company pointed out that ought to be in our software, and so that is a migration that we will do. We're not going to necessarily do it right now because we're going to replace the software, so we'll make sure that's loaded into the new one.
It says in the recommendation that you would use this tool as the basis for calculating staffing needs, but what it sounds like you're saying to me is you're doing that, you're just using a different tool. Is that correct? You don't see any, that you're not thinking there might be some different allocation of how we staff the parks based on this? which is the interpretation I maybe incorrectly had.
No, I think I think you're onto it. Right now, how we calculate the need, it's really, you know, Martin McKnight knows the parks and he knows the work and he knows what resources it takes. If he were on the call, he could rattle off what a number of folks that he has at different parks. He and I were talking earlier today, and you know, just to give you an idea, Cook Park regularly takes 3 of our permanent folks throughout the year, but in the summertime, there's another 3 seasonals. So you got 6 individuals just on Cook Park. But Martin knows across the board what that level of effort is. So we really use his know-how to help us forecast for staff. Now, the point that Matrix is making and you're bringing up is a good one. Yes, when we migrate to our new software, we're hoping it makes that effort even easier. So it becomes even more of a math equation when we're making staff forecasts.
Okay, let's see. I think that's all my questions for now.
Thank you, Councilor Newton. Do we want to act on this particular recommendation at this point?
You skip me. You skip me,
Chair
Cliff.
Roan,
Who?
Chair Roan, sorry, this is Councilor Newton. I thought of my other question, but this is for Finance Director LaFrance.
Go ahead.
So if we use the park utility fee fund for the first year and we don't raise the park fee in July, then we're right back where we started in terms of we don't have this program as proposed funded. Isn't that correct?
And when you say in July, you mean July
of 2021. If we don't raise the fee,
okay.
we're
Right. So
we're kind of right back where we are, right?
and I'll say the quick answer is yes, we're back where we are, because what we'd be looking at that point is trying to fund the additional staff that we're adding this year again through fund balance, and that's likely not going to be sustainable. Under normal circumstances, as the finance director for the city of Tigard, I would not be recommending that we add ongoing expenditures without adding the ongoing revenue source to support it. This year we were trying to balance. We have a known need. We've been adding parks. We haven't been adding park staff to maintain them over the course of this last year. And we also have a pandemic going on. We were weighing a lot of what the budget committee members have been talking about with the impact of the COVID and the uncertainty there. So, trying to figure out a way, and frankly, the general fund just can't afford it. And so trying to figure out a way to make sure that parks are maintained, that facilities are open in the community for people to use, and do it without increasing the park and recreation fee. And the only way we could think of doing it is to use the fund balance that is in the park utility fund. And there is sufficient fund balance that we can definitely get through this 12-month period using that fund balance. It will mean potentially that a year from now, if the city opts to keep the park and recreation fee at its current level and not have an increase, that we would be looking at paring back the parks maintenance staff and the parks maintenance service levels.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. LaFrance. Does that cover it for you, Councilor Newton?
Yes, it does. Thanks for your patience.
You're welcome. We have other items to discuss that are carried over.
Council President Goodhouse, skip me.
There you go.
Well, okay. You, I checked you off the box because you talked earlier. Please go ahead, Councilor.
One, I was going to make a comment, and I had just a question or a suggestion. But to go back on the couple asked about the River Terrace, that was something I had brought up at council when we were looking a while back at the parks, and I asked if it was something that there could be a separate fee for River Terrace residents to pay for their park separately. And the response from staff was, and it was a good one, and I didn't think about it, was that parks are open to everyone. And if we have something where those parks they're built out there, and if we exclude those parks and have them pay for them themselves, then we may have people say, well, why can I access those parks? And the philosophy for the city is to have all parks open to everyone. So even though those parks are up there might be nicer, they are open to all the residents of Tigers, just similar as Cook Park or any of the other areas. So maybe that people may not know, maybe that's something we may have to do with communication for residents and know that they can access those. And as more develops out there and the Lacey's property develops out there more and with access to the river, people may use those parks more up there. So I wanted to point that part out when it got brought up that if we do some separate fee for them up there, then that might be considered more of a closed area or only those parks for them. And it will be something that the council probably learned for the future agreements with any other future development to figure out what the parks look like and how they are as far as with future maintenance. I'm in agreement that I think July 21 for the increase, that's a ways away from here, and hopefully the pandemic's fine and people are back on their feet. I would like to have some way to maybe revisit this though in 6 months to see how the economy is, how things are, and if there was maybe a percentage increase we needed to do to get us on track. I always hate trying to use too much reserves and then leaving ourselves open for something happening, but it might be good to revisit this in 6 months to see where we are, and if there's a partial increase where we can do 30 cents or something, which may be nominal, and if things are back on the track.
Thank you. Well,
Chairman Brown, this is Leah Voigt. May I make a comment?
Yes.
Yeah. So I guess I wanted to do clarification, I guess, for the park staff, because we had talked about equity in terms of, and just allocation of staff. So to my understanding, though, is that the parks are ours, so they're going to need to be maintained regardless. So even if we don't add staff, that means the burden on the existing staff are going to be spread to cover those parks. So it's overall going to have a negative impact on all of our staff and all of our parks. Is that correct? Because the workload is still there.
Yeah, that is correct, and that's the general story that we were telling for many years, coming to Budget Committee, and last year we got approval to get staff to bring us up to where we needed to be at that time. But yeah, it's like the more acres you have, and if you keep the staff the same, you're just spreading those resources thinner and thinner. And that's my fear, is that I don't want us going backwards.
Mm-hmm. And then additional clarification, when we're talking about levels of park, we're talking about their level of needed maintenance in terms of the tiers. But if there's, deferred maintenance, or if like we don't have enough staff, then all the levels of all the parks are going to have delayed maintenance and less attention than recommended, correct?
That's correct. And I'll just real brief, the 4 levels that we've talked about, the top level 1s, those are like Cook Park, Summer Lake, etc. And the level 4s are our open space and greenway areas. And so how we have managed lack of staff in the past is we really like to keep those level 1s and 2s looking really good, and our park staff are very proud of the work they do. And so rather than what you and I see as users of the park looks pretty good, really good. And in our level 4s, we'll start dropping things off there, and that would mean we're going to be it's going to take us longer to respond to vandalism issues. It's going to take us longer to deal with trash that people throw in the greenways. Our response time is just going to be longer, and it would probably turn into complaint only. And so the concept is start with the 4s and the 3s, and at last resort would be to drop level of service in the 1s and 2s.
Thank you.
Any other questions remaining from either the members or from the council? Then I have 2 quick comments. First of all, Vince raised the question about efficiency and the dollars per acre relative to. Does that dollar per acre consider the gross acreages of all the parks or just the developed? And the reason I ask is, for instance, Basic property is 28 acres, but only 7 of it is developed and to be maintained. And is a very large piece of property. Not very much of it, relatively speaking, is developed. That's my first question.
I believe that calculation is based on gross acreage, and we do that. We try to match what the National Recreation and Park Association does, and so I believe that calculation is gross park acreage, so that we can compare apples to apples with other municipalities and agencies across the nation.
Okay, and the reason I asked that question is because a fair amount of our property still has not been developed and was added in the last 8 or 10 years to the total inventory. The second thing that I have is a comment related to Member Cadman's initial comment about the article forecasting something pretty significant on the downside from the state level. Another article that appeared today was a fairly lengthy one in the Atlantic magazine, talking about a number of cities, counties, and other jurisdictions around the country already looking at where their sales tax revenues and property tax revenues are not going to be in the very near future, and beginning to rebudget with declines as much as 40%. And it's going to hit school districts and police and fire and everybody else. Having said that with a preamble, I'm going to take the liberty of going ahead, even though we have a couple more discussion items. But because the discussion has been so long on this point, I'm going to move for sake of discussion that we accept the staff recommendation that the Budget Committee approve the budget package as proposed and used fund balance reserves in the Parks Utility Fund for the current fiscal year 2021. And that we recommend the Parks and Recreation fee increase not to occur until July 2021. And that's a recommendation that the increase take place a year from now. There's plenty of time to discuss it. That's my motion, and with a little bit of ad lib at the end. Sorry about that. Is there a second?
Council President Goodhouse, I second that.
Thank you, sir. Additional discussion.
This is Siobhan. I'd love to hear Brian's thoughts on that, if I could, on the motion.
Please go ahead, Brian.
Thank you. If I understood the motion, it is accepting staff's recommendation, and
exactly,
yeah, and recommending that the Park and Rec fee be raised no sooner than July 1 of 2021. That was our recommendation, and I obviously would support that.
Thank you, Mr. Hager. Any additional questions or discussion?
Nope, I am in support of that motion. Thank you.
Thank you.
This
Liz? Sorry.
This is Leah Voigt.
Yes, ma'am.
I know there were additional members on the committee that had reservations, and I was curious if they or others were interested in discussing kind of options that might limit the current impact, such as hiring 1 versus 2 utility workers, or exploring the January versus July option, or if they would just prefer to move forward with the vote.
Thank you. It's an open mic right at the moment. Who would like to address Ms. Voigt's comment?
Yeah, if I could speak up, this is Tim Cadman. If you choose to move forward, then I do have a question regarding the supervisor. I'm trying to find the document. Give me 1 second here. I think, oh, there it is. The current supervisor oversees 10 full-time FTE and 12 seasonal. And you wanted to add an additional supervisor for those seasonal employees. So this supervisor would have people to supervise on a seasonal basis. So when you say summer employees, I'm assuming that's 3 to 4 months, maybe push it 5 a year. What is that? Who is that supervisor going to be supervising the other 6, 7, 8, 9 months out of the year?
Thank you, Mr. Cadman. Let me clarify. The second supervisor would not just be supervising seasonals. We would be breaking the 10, essentially breaking the 10 full-time employees across 2 supervisors. So each supervisor would have some level of permanent staff and seasonal staff to supervise each year.
Okay, thank you. And then just my response to that then is, I've been in a number of companies in the business world, and having a span of control of 10 is pretty common these days. Span of control of 5 is, in my opinion, a luxury. So if we were to move forward, I would recommend that we do so without the addition of another supervisor. If we need more utility workers, to me that's one thing. Adding another supervisor to cover the seasonal areas, to me, then add a seasonal supervisor, I think would be the answer.
Mr. Rohn, this is Mayor Snyder. Can I comment on that too and just ask some additional span of control questions? I had thought about that, but didn't bring it into my comments. But is that okay, Mr. Rohn?
Please go ahead.
On this point, I've asked this question a number of times in the city because, to Mr. Cadman's point, the span of control in general for at least for private industry is definitely, especially for frontline workers that are doing things like maintaining parks, would be way more than 5 employees. And 25 or 30 is not unheard of in many industries with frontline staff, sometimes up to 50. And I guess I want to understand that better too. I understand there's different locations involved, and it may be that you desire to have sort of a supervisor that's dedicated to each of the crews. But again, that may be a luxury we can't afford, given, I don't know, I guess I just want to lend credence to the span of control discussion here. And there are not a lot of places you're going to find 5 direct reports reporting to a supervisor in private industry. It's just doesn't happen.
Chair Rohn, would it be okay if I responded to that?
Oh, certainly. Please, Mr. Rigger.
I guess a reminder that part of the reason we are proposing the supervisor was that, it comes down to performance, and the performance audit pointed out that we have a gap there. And while I would agree that a span of control of 5 is a luxury, and certainly doable, a span of control of 25 is not. And so we're just trying to figure out a way that we can cover that, since we have seasonals a decent part of the year. So for a good part of the year, both supervisors would have, 10 or more reports, all of which have to be, evaluated for their performance, and certainly the permanent staff have to be evaluated every year. So that's hopefully that helped a little bit.
Brian, is there a role for lead workers in this job classification? And is there a reason why a lead worker can't be monitoring the quality of the outcome of a job?
To some extent, we do have senior utility workers, and they act as lead workers. So they are there as a help to the supervisor to make sure the work is lined out for the day. They are working alongside the crews. They do not, however, have supervisory authority. They can't discipline. They can't, they can talk to the supervisor and maybe make some recommendations, but they don't have the authority to have direct supervision over crew members.
This is Leah Voigt. How long, when you discuss seasonal workers, how many months of the year is that?
Sure. Our supervisor starts bringing seasonal workers on in the month of March, and what he does is brings a batch of them on, maybe 5 or so, and then tries to overlap that so that we have a peak number of seasonals in the peak of summer. And then I should mention that each seasonal worker we can keep for 6 months, and then we have to let them go. So he tries to time it such that in the peak of summer we've got the 10 that's currently in the budget, and then would start dropping them off toward the end of summer, and then the last of the seasonals, I believe, the month of November is when we would say goodbye to them for the year.
Are there any other questions for Mr. Rager? If none, then would anyone like to propose an amendment to the motion?
Councillor Newton here. I think
Yes.
what picked me up, I mean, I know this is really important, and we've got to address park maintenance. It's the next thing on my list since the levy passed for police services. But I keep thinking about what that Director LaFrance said about, funding ongoing programs without revenue. I guess what's really tripping me up is to have a recommendation for a specific dollar amount on the rec fee on July 1st, 2021. I mean, we may get to that point and we may have different options. We may have a different amount. So I'm leaning more towards, I mean, I don't like using the fund that we're talking about doing, the park utility fund for this current year, but I'm more uncomfortable recommending a specific fee on July 1st, 2021. I feel like that ties all of our hands. It's something we're going to have to look at how we're going to fund this, but I think that's my biggest concern if I have one.
Might I ask for clarification? That is, if the Budget Committee makes a recommendation today for something to occur 14 months from now, is that cast in stone?
Well, no, but, it sort of sets, I mean, I feel like the expectation would be there that short of another, a good reason not to. I mean, what's our other option? If that's my concern. I mean, I do think we need to address this. This is, not sustainable. We've got to maintain our parks, but I'm just concerned about recommending such a specific action on July 1st, 2021. It just, I don't know. I think we need to, I mean, if we make a recommendation to look at that and consider that, that's fine, but I'm not comfortable saying $1.37 because I think then you set up the expectation that that's going to happen. Maybe we need more, maybe we need less. And I think in this next year, one thing I'm going to recommend to the council is we take a hard look at how we're funding park maintenance. Maybe we'll all come up with a really fabulous idea between now and then, I hope. Anyway, that's my concern.
Then Councillor Newton, would you propose an amendment to the language in the second sentence of the staff recommendation?
Can I
Well, I guess I'm interested in seeing if other folks felt similarly to me, or if I'm kind of the only one who has that concern.
Is that Mayor Snyder?
That was Council President Goodhouse.
Councilor Goodhouse, please go ahead.
Councilor Newton, I think in my eyes, I think it's more of a budgeting placeholder where by doing the recommendation, of course, like you said, we can go up or down, but at least gives a sense for staff to look at hiring or planning or knowing what's going on with the future budget, to at least know that placeholder's there, and it gives at least a kind of a hat tip to the next budget committee to know that this was really needed and the reasons why. There might be a footnote that says this is delayed due to the pandemic, but this is really what we need to do to continue on, and that way at least staffing can be hired or planned or everything can be done with at least kind of a place mark amount. And if the different funding source comes up or we need to go up or down, we can change it, and maybe we make an amendment that says this is a footnote. This could be adjusted up or down, or it can be replaced if some other funding method happens. But I think it's good to at least have that there to kind of imply what the direction is, what we need to keep our parks at a certain level of maintenance.
This is Councillor Lube. I would concur with Councillor Newton. I think if we put it out there, the expectation is there, and I would encourage our budget committee next year and maybe even the council over the next year to really look into it and figure it out and come up with a more sustainable way to continue to fund our parks maintenance. Our parks are so important. There's not a single time where I drive by a park or I go to a park where someone isn't there. It's an incredibly valued piece of our community, and we need to continue to take care of our assets. But I worry about the automatic expectation that the budget committee will pass this next year without us really taking a deep look into it. So I would be supportive of an amendment to open up the expectation and leave it open-ended.
I guess to that point.
Point of order, I would ask for specific wording then, please. Do we have a specific amendment to the motion?
Did Budget Committee member Chris Benz want to say something?
Yeah, I was just going to ask, would this be an effective stick if you knew that, unless we had some other option that, this is what we're going with? Would that help you? Would that be a good motivator? Or is it just a burden?
It's just, I don't know, it's just too specific. And it just, I may be in the minority here, but it just makes me uncomfortable to be that specific. It's as if we're saying, we're going to do it with the utility fee and then we're going to raise the rate. And we just don't know where we're going to be sitting. So I agree with Councilor Lube too. I would really like us to take a deep dive. These are critical, critical amenities to our community, and we need to figure out a way to maintain them. But being this specific, so I guess I would recommend that if we're going to do this, it be that we use the fund balance reserves for FY21, and the committee asks that council review more permanent funding sources over the next year, including a increase in the Parks and Recreation fee.
Are you offering that as an amendment, Councilor Newton?
A very poorly worded amendment. Thank you.
Councilor,
go ahead.
Councilor Lube, I will second the amendment.
Thank you. Liz, could you please read us back what you have of Councilor Newton's recommended amendment, and we'll tweak it before we vote.
I was going to say, well, not really.
Okay, then let me go back to Councilor Newton. Councilor Newton, please rephrase your amendment, and Councilor Lube. Go ahead.
Okay, I will say that we approve the budget package as proposed and use fund balance reserves in the park utility fund for FY21, and that the committee recommends that the council review more permanent funding source for FY22, including a possible increase in the Parks and Recreation fee.
Thank you. Is that clearer, Liz?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. And Councilor Lube, do you maintain your second?
Yes.
Thank you. Liz, please go through the roll for votes on the amendment.
Siobhan?
I support the amendment.
Councilor Anderson?
Yes.
Chris?
Yes.
Councilor Lube?
Yes.
Tim?
I'm going to say no.
Okay. Councilor Goodhouse?
No.
Leah?
Yes.
Mayor Snyder?
Yes.
Clifford?
Yes.
Councilor Newton?
Yes.
The motion passes 8-2.
Then the original motion would be voted on as amended, if I remember my Robert's Rules of Order correctly.
But, Chair Roan, this is Councilor Newton again. Did
Yes.
you have some people suggesting that maybe we drop down a position? I don't know if we want to talk about that as well. I was trying to not get too many things in my motion, but I thought there was somebody who wanted to suggest that we decrease the number of positions, but maybe I'm wrong.
Okay, Councilor Newton raises a question. Would somebody like to make a motion for that?
I'll speak up here. This is Tim. I was the one that raised the question regarding the supervisor, but I'm still further away. I assumed that I was going to get outvoted, so I wanted to throw that out there that if you do pass it, I would recommend you do it without a supervisor. But I have a bigger concern in that if we don't have sufficient funding, we're going to take care of these really nice parks and let the parks that aren't quite as nice get even worse. I would highly recommend we go in the other direction and let them all get to about the same level so that there is equity throughout the city, particularly if we're heading in a direction where all the residents in the city are going to be paying equally for all of them.
Thank you for that comment. The chair would like to ask for clarification at this point in order to keep things moving. Is there another meeting prior to the final vote on the fiscal 21 budget where we can further talk about some tweaking of any specific item? And I would ask Mayor Snyder, President Goodhouse, if I'm remembering incorrectly.
Well, I think the plan was to have the budget adopted at the June 16th meeting, if I'm thinking, and I don't think that if you're asking if there's a meeting of the budget committee scheduled between now and then, I don't think so, but Mr. LaFrance and or City Manager Wine may need to add to that.
What I'm remembering specifically is a meeting to be held on June 9th, and I'm not remembering why that date.
Clifford, this is Liz. The June 9th meeting
Yes.
is a potential subcommittee meeting of the subcommittee for community events if needed. It did not include the entire budget committee, just the social service community events subcommittee. It was just to save the date.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. Mr. Cadman, back to you. Would you like to make a specific motion?
No, I don't need to at this time. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for your comments. The main motion, I don't remember exact Robert's Rules of Order, but the amendment includes the primary language from the original motion with an amendment of the second part of that. As the maker of the original motion, I will yield to the amended motion that we have just passed. Does the person who seconded the original motion also yield?
Yes.
Thank you very much. The original motion then is withdrawn. The amended motion passes, and we will move on to the Wi-Fi hotspot memo from Ms. Bernard.
Clifford, can I just
Sure.
interject? This is Liz again.
Yes, ma'am.
I just want clarification because we didn't talk about the police overtime. That was something brought to the budget committee member by a budget committee member. And I didn't know if when you said, do we want to talk about memo that was submitted by the police department?
Okay, thank you, Liz. Do any of the budget committee members have questions regarding Chief McAlpine and Shaw's response on overtime?
Cliff, this is Mayor Snyder. I think we're getting really, so unless I missed something, we didn't even vote on the actual motion, the last thing. We only voted on the amendment and then the withdraw of the original motion, right? I mean, it seems like we haven't even closed up the last thing. Or did I miss that?
Yeah.
Well, that was my attempt not to get too deep into too many different possibilities was to withdraw the original motion and yield to amendment. Motion that was being voted on.
But amendment would have to be part of the original one, so I don't know if we actually should have removed it, because if you amend it, then you just go back to the original motion and say you vote on the original motion with the amendments.
Okay, then for some sake, we will reopen it for vote on the original motion as amended, or with the amendment. Does the original seconder agree?
Yes.
Thank you. Liz, please go through and ask for votes on the original motion as amended.
Cliff, can we make sure that everybody knows what that motion is?
The original motion that I made was intended to be verbatim the staff recommendation in the Parks and Maintenance memo.
So what if we have Ms. Lutz just read the motion with the amended language before the vote?
Okay. The original motion was that the Budget Committee approve the budget package as proposed and used fund balance reserves in the Parks Utility Fund for fiscal year 21, and recommend the Parks and Recreation fee be increased an additional $1.37 per EDU on July 1, 2021 to make this decision sustainable. And the amendment that was voted on was recommending that the Budget Committee approve the budget package as proposed and use fund balance reserves in the Parks Utility Fund for fiscal year 21 with the language that Councilor Newton put in, recommending that it be a further consideration. And Liz, please clarify that.
So Liz Newton's one, use fund balance as reserve in the Parks and Recreation Fund for fiscal year 21. And the committee recommends that the City Council recommend a more permanent funding structure for fiscal year 22 with the possibility of including a Parks and Recreation Fund increase.
Thank you. Does anyone have any further questions about the motion or the amendment? Okay, the amendment has been approved. So let's now vote on the original motion as amended. Is everyone up to speed now? And I don't mean that in a negative way.
No, actually, sorry, this is Member Voigt. I think I'm actually more confused. Did you say that your amendment was to vote on the entire budget as proposed, just with the amendment about the recommendation at this time?
This specifically has to do with the Parks memo, the Parks maintenance memo, and the use of those Parks maintenance funds.
Okay, thank you.
We're not to the point where we're ready to consider the entire budget yet.
Okay, thank you. This was Member Voigt. I didn't think so, but I just heard something weird in the wording. Thank you for clarifying.
You're welcome. Any other questions? Okay, Liz, please call the roll on the original motion.
Siobhan?
So I guess I'm a little unclear. Is the original motion the one that includes Councilor Newton's modifications?
The original motion as amended.
Original motion as amended. Yes.
Thank you.
Councilor Anderson?
Yes.
Chris?
Yes.
Councilor Lube?
Yes.
Tim?
No.
Councilor Goodhouse?
Yes.
Leah?
Yes.
Mayor Snyder?
No.
Clifford?
Yes.
Councilor Newton?
Yes.
Okay, motion passed.
What is the count, please?
Okay, it's voted yes, 8-2.
Thank you. It is 8:13. We cut off the public comment or public testimony phone in at 7:10. I would ask whether or not we ended up getting any public comment.
We had no callers.
And nothing written has come in either, Liz?
Correct.
Thank you very much. Let's move on to the Wi-Fi hotspot memo from Ms. Bernard in the library.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Halstead Bernard, Tigard Public Library Director, and I'll be speaking tonight about the possibility of expanding our mobile hotspot program. So first of all, thank you for considering an increase to the budget to promote digital equity in our community. The library's mobile hotspot program has been incredibly popular since we launched it in November of 2018. Since then, our 11 hotspots have circulated 270 times in total, which is an average of 24 times per hotspot. And currently, there are 30 hold requests from patrons on these hotspots just waiting for us to open our doors again and be able to circulate them. So the demand currently exceeds our current inventory. So based on the costs provided by Mobile Beacon, which I've included in the memo, each device will cost $205, which covers the purchase of the hotspot, the annual service cost, and administrative fee. So an increase of $5,000, as was mentioned at the previous meeting, would allow the City of Tigard to increase our inventory by 24 units for a total of 35 hotspots available to our community members. That investment would increase the hotspot circulation by more than 200%, and it would definitely help to fulfill the demand in our community. Also included in the memo is a proposal for building up the hotspot program also in fiscal year 22, which would result in a total of 50 hotspots available to our community members. And that's all from me. Thank you so much for your consideration. I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you very much, Ms. Bernard. Are there any questions for Ms. Bernard? Members, Chandler?
No questions.
Thank you. Councilor Anderson?
No questions.
Thank you. Mr. Bentz?
No questions. Just the only comment would be, we were talking about equity, and this is a step in the right direction towards more equitable Tigard. So I appreciate it. Thanks.
Thank you. Councilor Lube?
Yes, I think this is great, and I'm hugely supportive of it. My only question, and maybe I missed it, I tried to read through, is where is this funding coming from? What's the source?
That's a good question.
So this is Toby LaFrance, Finance and Information Services Director. If the Budget Committee is interested in approving this proposal, this would be an additional $5,000 that the general fund would be supporting. This is something that doesn't come with additional revenue. It is a very modest request, and so. If the Budget Committee is interested in this proposal or a version of this proposal, they'll need to do so through a motion, second, and a vote that would amend the budget as proposed.
Thank you, Mr. LaFrance. Does that answer your question, Councilor Lube?
It does. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Cadman, any questions?
No questions, just a quick comment. I do want to echo Chris's comments that in the spirit of equity inclusion, and then also Toby's, that this is a modest amount. To me, this is money put to good use that can benefit everybody in the community, and particularly those who need it more than others. So I will be supporting this.
Thank you. Councilor Goodhouse?
No questions.
Thank you. Ms. Voigt?
No questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Mayor Snyder?
No questions. I support it.
Thank you. Councilor Newton?
Just two quick questions. I think this is great and I really do support it. Can you remind me how long, if I check one of these out, how long I get to use it? I didn't see it in the memo. Maybe I missed it.
Each hotspot circulates for 2 weeks.
Okay. And then the other question is, what we're talking about now is an increase of 5,000, but at the bottom of your chart, you're talking about a total cost on an ongoing basis of 6,000, but that's after the ramp up in the next year. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Bernard, clarification. The way I read the grid at the bottom of your memo, it's $6,000 for the ongoing service cost, but the total cost to put them in place is also 6,000?
Sorry, I was muted. So the annual service cost, if we were to ramp up to 50 hotspots total, would be $6,000. But the total cost, if we're just purchasing 24 hotspots in fiscal year 21, would be that last in the last column would be $4,920. The annual service cost is the next column to the left, and that is the recurring cost that would need to be added to the budget.
Okay, so the total ask for this current budget that we're working on for fiscal year 21 would be $10,920?
No, I'm sorry. The total ask for this fiscal year that we're talking about would be $4,920.
Okay. And then the total ask for implementation in fiscal 22 would be $3,075?
Yes, because we would be purchasing fewer hotspots, so it would be cost a little less for that.
Okay, so the 4920 this year includes the servicing over and above what is already in your budget?
Yes.
Okay. Then is there a motion for the fiscal 21 budget to address the Wi-Fi hotspots? And I'm going to put Councilor Anderson on the spot because I think he brought this up.
I move to approve $5,000 from the proposed general fund budget for the hotspot program.
This is Chris Pence. I'll second that.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Liz, would you please call a roll for the motion?
Siobhan?
Yes.
Councilor Anderson?
Yes.
Chris?
Yes.
Councilor Lube?
Yes.
Tim?
Yes.
Councilor Goodhouse?
Yes.
Leah?
Yes.
Mayor Snyder?
Yes.
Clifford?
Yes.
Councilor Newton?
Yes.
Thank you all. The motion passes. I can do that count. The next item on the agenda is the Mlg Trimet Memo. Mr. LaFrance.
Good evening, Budget Committee. Toby LaFrance, Finance and Information Services Director. I'm going to briefly make a presentation on two items, the Mlg Trimet and the Community Events Grants. These are in response to questions that were received at the last meeting. With the MLG and Trimet, these are projects where it follows our recent history of adding to budgets, primarily when revenues support the addition of expenditures. MLG is the Metropolitan Land Group. They're developers, and they are reimbursing the City of Tigard for staff that we had to add and hire to do urban growth boundary expansion. Trimet is also reimbursing the City of Tigard for staff time being spent on the Southwest Corridor project. Reimbursement is included in the budget. However, what we did find is in researching this particular topic was that the MLG reimbursement was under budgeted, and we have a proposed fix for that in the technical adjustments. While revenues aren't actually an item that the Budget Committee budgets for, we do like to point out when we're making changes to that because it does have an impact on ending fund balance. I did take a look, adding that additional revenue to the general fund. It also impacts Central Service Fund and the Public Works Engineering Fund. but in particular, looking at the general fund, the additional revenue didn't do anything to significantly change the forecast. So we're still looking at a forecast that is sustainable for one fewer year than it was prior to the COVID event. Are there any questions on the MLG and Trimet item?
This is Chair Roan. I have one particular question regarding the contract with MLG, and that is, does the City of Tigard have any ongoing or future obligations relative to Metropolitan Land Group arising out of this planning engineering exercise?
Can you expand on that question just a little bit? What do you mean by obligations?
To grant so many building permits, to waive any future engineering fees, any future SDC fees, any of those sorts of things, should Metropolitan Land Group come into title to properties in that area.
So to be clear, when we made our contract with Metropolitan Land Group, it was clear that the City of Tigard is determining the scope of the work that we will be doing, and we will treat this urban growth expansion the same way we would treat it if Metropolitan Land Group wasn't paying for it. This was a matter of the city having multiple priorities and multiple goals, and frankly, this urban growth expansion wasn't going to happen unless we had additional resources to pay for the city's time and to add staff so that we weren't taking time away from the city's other goals and priorities. In short, to answer your question, no, we're not beholden to Metropolitan Land Group outside of working with them to fulfill the requirements of putting in an application to add to the urban growth boundary by the City of Tigard.
And
Toby, this is Mayor Snyder. I would add one thing to what you said to clarify, which is that this was a goal, but the timing of it was not what was at issue here. So it was not that it wasn't going to be a goal, it was that it wasn't going to happen as quickly as the Metropolitan Land Group was hoping, and because of resources and priorities, and they said, okay, then we'll take care of that for you.
Okay, and does that obligate the City of Tigard to go through with amending the urban growth boundary in a particular time frame?
It doesn't obligate us to do anything permanently.
Okay, thank you. No further questions.
I have a question really quick just for clarification. I think Director LaFrance can answer this. This is Councillor Newton. The staffing for both of these, my memory is that, as you commented, we did have to hire additional staff. So these staff then are sort of time limited, is that correct?
This project to do the work that will eventually lead to, so the quick answer is no. We brought on regular staff because this project is going to exceed 2 years, and generally if we have project staff, it is for 2 years or less. And this is a project that's expected to last somewhere on the order of 4 years. So they are regular staff that we brought in.
I guess I wasn't clear on my question. At some point, though, the project's going to be over, and those staff won't have a funding source. Is that correct? The staff
that is correct.
Okay, I just wanted to, I thought that was the case. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Newton. Any further questions for Mr. LaFrance on the MLG proposal or clarifications?
Council President Goodhouse, so those will just be It'll just fall into that amount, but it won't be designated as a line item as far as where that funding's coming from. It'll just be a non-budgetary item within the general fund.
So it will actually be part of line items. So the reimbursement, if a person was to go and look at the fund summary for the general fund back in the fund summary section, they would find a revenue line item for recovered expenditures is the name of the revenue line, and it will be a component of that, and we will be increasing that revenue line item. And however, to reiterate, the budget committee and council, when you're approving and adopting a budget, you don't adopt your revenues. The revenues are there to support the appropriations that you are approving and adopting. So we want, that said, after having found this omission, we will include it, and we're informing you through the technical adjustments that we're going to make that change.
Okay.
So that's a courtesy. It's not something that legally we have to do. However, it makes things, it makes sure that we're providing all the information publicly.
Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Chandler, any questions?
No questions.
Counselor Anderson.
No questions.
Mr. Bentz.
Nothing here.
Counselor Lube.
No questions.
Member Admin.
No questions. Thank you.
Ms. Voigt.
No questions. Thank you.
Mayor Snyder.
No questions.
Okay, thank you. Counselor Newton and Counselor Goodhouse, you already spoke. Anything to add?
No more for me.
Okay.
No.
Thank you. Mr. LaFrance, the community events memo that you gave us all, please go ahead.
Yes, so concern was raised at the last meeting on the 16th regarding community events and whether or not all of those events are going to happen because of the pandemic and social distancing that is required, and the various orders and rules of the governor and the city. So what I've laid out in the memo is to propose a way to reevaluate those applications and the grants that were recommended. So just to kind of back up the general process through a normal budget process is we have a subcommittee of the budget committee. They will review all of the community event grant applications. They make recommendations. So those recommendations are found in the proposed budget at the back of the community service section of the proposed budget document. What staff is proposing is by Wednesday next week, reminder Monday is a holiday, all proposed recipients will be contacted and asked to provide information on the following two questions. Is the funded event canceled due to the pandemic? And if the event is canceled, please indicate if the award is still requested and specifically how the funds would be used. We would then ask for a response by Thursday, June 4th, giving them slightly over a week to respond. The following Tuesday, we would reconvene the subcommittee. They will review the responses and will make one of four determinations: maintaining the recommended funding, eliminating or reducing the recommended funding, redistributing funding if there has been a reduction or elimination to events that are ongoing or have a demonstrated need and whose original request was not fully funded in the proposed budget. And if funds remain after that stage, staff is recommending that those be carried forward on a one-time basis to the fiscal year 22 community event grants. Then on the following day, staff will notify council of the recommendation from the subcommittee. And finally, this time frame would allow council to take any necessary action during the budget hearing on June 16th. That's the end of the presentation.
Thank you, Mr. LaFrance. We'll go through the list questions for Mr. LaFrance on the community events calendar and the process to be used there. Ms. Chandler.
No questions.
Thank you. Councilor Anderson.
No questions.
Thank you. Mr. Bentz.
No question.
Thank you. Councilor Liu.
No questions.
Thank you. Mr. Cadman.
Nothing from me. Thank you.
Welcome. Councilor Goodhouse.
No questions.
Thank you. Ms. Voigt.
No questions.
Thank you. Mayor Snyder.
None from me.
Thank you. Councilor Newton.
I have no questions, thanks.
Thank you very much, everyone. It's 8:35. We would be scheduled to have a break here. We do have another presentation for discussion, and that would be the appropriations and investments by Mr. Kang. Would you like to take a break and reconvene in 5 minutes, or continue on? Anyone have a strong feeling one way or another?
5 minutes.
Okay. Then we will break for 5 minutes. See you at 8:41. Thank you.
Thank you.
Chairman Ron, are you back?
I am.
This is Tim. Just before we get to where we approve the budget, I do have one question for Toby related to the 2 FTE in regards to the ERP system. If I could get a chance to ask a question before we vote on the overall budget, that'd be great.
On the which system?
The ERP system. The new ERP system is good. The Taylor something or other.
Oh, okay. All right. We might as well cover that under this section of the agenda for follow-up and discussion.
Okay.
I'll add that. Do you want to do that right after Mr. Kang?
Sure.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Budget Committee is back in session. Do we have everyone? Ms. Chandler?
Present.
Thank you. Counselor Anderson?
Here.
Mr. Bentz?
I'm here.
Counselor Lube?
Here.
Mr. Cadman?
Present.
Counselor Goodhouse?
Present.
Ms. Voigt?
Here.
Mayor Snyder?
Here.
Counselor Newton?
I'm here.
Thank you all. Mr. Kang, if you're there, thank you very much for your patience and allowing us to take a break. At this point, would you please go through your scheduled appropriations and adjustments, technical adjustments that were sent out earlier today or late yesterday, whichever that was?
Yes, Mr. Rohn. This is Steve Kang, a Senior Management Analyst from Finance and Information Services. I'll be presenting the technical adjustments to fiscal year 21 proposed budget. I stated this on the email, but I'll state it again for the general public audience. Technical adjustments are changes to the proposed budget that comes as recommendations from staff, such as carry forward of prior year's appropriations and or adjustments due to the key information becoming available after the proposed budget was submitted. So I'll break down the technical adjustments into 3 buckets: adjustment to operations, adjustment to CIP, and adjustment to transfers. So first, on adjustments to operations, the operations from policy and administrations, community services, and public works are increasing the appropriation by $257,000. Policy and administration is a small increase on the contractual services for mayor, council, and mayor division. And community services, essentially a carry forward from library division for materials that has been spent due to COVID-19 exposure. And the remainder is from Public Works for $120,000 for contractual services and purchasing and equipment. Next slide. So adjustments to the capital improvement plan. The total CIP appropriation change is $1,341,000 across 4 systems: facilities, storm, streets, and water. Of that, carry forward is $1,401,000, and other revisions to the CIP is reductions of $60,000 for pavement management program for the transferring over to a gas tax fund for the work that's done by our street crew. So lastly, the adjustments to transfers is $1,343,902, and of that, CIP-driven transfers are $1,205,000, and the miscellaneous accounts for $138,902. So overall, the technical adjustments to the fiscal year 2021 proposed budget will increase the appropriations by roughly $2.9 million. Of the $2.9 million, only $72,000 will be coming from the reserves, and the rest will be coming from the contingencies and additional revenues. So this table is the schedule of appropriation. So obviously we just passed the $5,000 additional appropriation for library, so that wouldn't be included in this slide. However, the first column shows the budget as proposed, and the tech adjustments is the second column, and that should tie to the figures that I presented in the previous slide. And the police services levy accounts for $2.2 million from the police department, and $231,620 is for the central services, the increased budget in central services related to the budget levy. Some changes to the, lastly, the changes to the FTE budget as proposed was 319.25 FTEs. With the changes in the police levy, it's now the recommended approved FTE count is 332.95. So that's the end of the presentation. If you have any questions, we're available to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Kang. Ms. Chandler.
No questions.
Councilor Anderson.
No questions.
Mr. Bentz.
Only question is, you said there was it 70,000? That was the only amount that was not covering itself? Did I hear that?
$72,000 is coming from the reserves.
Okay, gotcha. All right, thank you. That's all I had.
Councilor Liu.
No questions from me. Thank you.
Mr. Cadman.
I'm all set. Thank you.
Okay. Councilor Goodhouse.
None for me.
Ms. Voigt.
No questions.
Mayor Snyder.
I just want to thank staff. This year, this part of the presentation I think is particularly well done and appreciated, and made it so clear that I don't think we're going to have a lot of questions. So I just want to recognize staff for that and thank them.
And Councilor Newton.
Well, I had questions, but Director LaFrance answered them earlier today, so I'm good.
Okay, thank you very much. And at this point, Member Cadman had a question regarding some follow-up from Financial Information Services from the May 16th meeting. Mr. Cadman, would you go ahead and ask us your questions?
Yep, thank you, Mr. Rohn. Mr. LaFrance, this is for you. I was just going back and looking through documentation, and it looks like there was a request to add 2 FTE in the Information Tech Division, 1 Senior Application Administrator, 1 Senior Data Analyst, and the purpose of those 2 additional FTE was to support the initiative to replace the city's outdated and aging enterprise resource system. I think this is what you had referred to as the Taylor system or something to that effect. Just for my education, how many FTE do we have supporting the current system? And it feels odd to me. Typically, when you improve your technology, you get to reduce your headcount as a result. That's one of the benefits of investing in the technology. So it dawned on me as a little surprising. We're going to be investing in new technology and requiring new headcount. Can you just provide a little bit more color around that?
I can, and also Mike Nollop, IT manager, is also available and he may need to answer part of the question. Let me take the last part of the question, which is our systems have been largely supported by the software companies themselves. So the software maintenance and support that you pay for as part of your annual license costs, and the performance audit pointed out to the city of Tigard where that left us with some holes in our services in terms of being able to extract data, in terms of being able to analyze that data, and in terms of being able to then present information both to decision makers and to the community as a whole. Part of what we are going to be doing is this staff will not only be helping us with the implementation of the total Tyler system, it will be helping us do once we have implementation, to essentially run the systems from a client standpoint for the city of Tigard. And the other thing that this is doing is we have a number of city staff sprinkled throughout the organization that have regular full-time jobs and are trying to do some of this software maintenance. And with Total Tyler, what we're going to have is taking all of those, many of those different systems, and putting it all into one ERP enterprise system. And so these people will be performing the support that are being kind of done on a very piecemeal basis across departments. Mr. Nolop, can you kind of maybe talk a little bit more about the positions themselves?
Sure. I think, Toby, you did a great job of explaining it. The one thing I will say right now is that we have 0 dedicated people to our enterprise systems. The same people that do help desk requests, network security, cybersecurity, all of the different aspects of IT are the ones that will help support our enterprise systems currently. A lot of that work, any enhancements or changes, are done by contracted vendors. So, quite a few budget cycles from now, when the Total Tyler project is done, there might be some cost savings by not having to rely on outside vendors to support those systems. But really, we're building this with a team of people to run the systems and make the changes to the new system over the next 10 years. As Tigard business and needs changes, we'll be able to handle that in-house as well. The database administrator position is one that is a hole for us right now. Currently, we do not have any database or reporting people on the IT staff. With the data-informed initiatives, that becomes quite a challenge when you can't access or report on your data. So that is one position that is definitely needed. The second one would be, the programmer and the administrator, the one working on security rights and workflows, adjustments, making sure the data is intact and there and available for the users.
Okay, fantastic. That puts my mind at ease. So thank you very much for the response.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Are there any other discussion items before we move on to the state revenue sharing and debt service and property tax-based discussions of Mr. LaFrance? Anything else that committee members would like to bring up? Ms. Chandler?
Nothing additional. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Anderson?
No questions.
Thank you. Mr. Bentz?
None here. Thanks.
Thank you. Councilor Lube?
Nothing to add. Thanks.
Thank you. Mr. Cadman?
I'm all set at this point. Thank you.
Good, thank you. Councilor Goodhouse?
None, thank you.
Welcome. Member Voigt?
No questions, thank you.
Thank you. Mayor Snyder?
Nothing further.
Thank you. Councilor Newton?
Nothing else for me. Thanks.
Thank you, everyone, especially for your patience. Muddled through that Robert's Rules of Order thing on the parks motion. I should have gone back and boned up on that a little better. Next, we're moving to the final stages toward approval of the budget, where we will now open up the public hearing on the state revenue sharing. This is a requirement of the state law. The city must hold a public hearing to receive state revenue sharing. Toby, could you please discuss how that affects us with the state revenue sharing?
Thank you, Chair Roan. Toby LaFrance, Finance and Information Services Director. So the state revenue sharing law, which is in ORS 221.770, allocates a share of state liquor tax to cities on a formula basis. The law requires cities annually to pass an ordinance or a resolution to request state revenue sharing money. In order to receive state revenue sharing, the city must levy property taxes in the preceding year, which we did. The law also requires public hearing to be held by the city, and certification of these hearings is also required. This budget committee meeting fulfills that requirement and is the hearing. The city estimates the receipt of $623,462 to the city's general fund of state revenue sharing for the fiscal year 2020-2021 budget. So to fulfill the needs of the hearing, what we need from the budget committee this evening is approval that we wish to accept state revenue sharing. Additionally, this will then be a resolution that will come forward as part of the budget adoption process on June 16th. That concludes the presentation.
At this point, we need a motion to receive the city's portion of state revenue sharing. Do we have a motion?
This is Tim Cadman. This is Tim Cadman. I would like to move to receive the city's share of the state revenue sharing, as Toby had suggested.
Thank you. And who offered the second, please?
This is Chris Spence. I'll second that.
Thank you. We have a motion to receive the city's share of state revenue sharing. Do we have a second? No, excuse me. We do have a second. Liz, would you please call the roll on this? Everyone in favor saying yes. Any opposed say no.
Siobhan?
Yes.
Councilor Anderson?
Yes.
Chris?
Yes.
Councilor Lube?
Yes.
Tim?
Yes, please.
Councilor Goodhouse?
Yes.
Leah?
Yes.
Mayor Snyder?
Yes.
Clifford?
Yes.
Councilor Newton?
Yes.
Passed.
Thank you very much. Mr. LaFrance, would you please inform us of debt service and our property tax rate to be levied?
Yes, thank you. One of the other duties of the budget committee is to levy property taxes. And we this evening get to do something we haven't done before. So we will need a motion and a second to levy property taxes at Cities Tigard at a permanent property tax rate of $2.51.31 per thousand assessed value, a local option levy tax rate of 29 cents per thousand of assessed value, and finally debt service for general fund obligations in the amount of $2,440,000.
Do we have anyone who will make that motion as stated?
This is Tim Cadman. Can I just say so moved?
I think so, unless anybody has a question about what the motion is. And a second?
This is Leah Voigt. I second.
I'll second. Oh.
Thank you. Is there any further discussion or questions about the motion? So we have a motion to levy the permanent property tax rate of $2.51.31 per thousand, plus an additional 29 cents per thousand local option levy property tax, and to levy the debt service for general obligation bonds of $2,440,000. And when that has been seconded, please take the roll call vote. Liz?
Councilor Newton? Counselor Newton,
Yes.
Clifford,
Yes.
Mayor Snyder,
Yes, with enthusiasm.
Leah,
Yes.
Counselor Goodhouse,
Yes.
Tim,
Yes, please.
Counselor Lube,
Yes.
Chris,
Moderate enthusiasm, yes.
Counselor Anderson,
Yes.
Siobhan.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, the motion passes. I think we have complied with state law there in those regards. Would anyone like at this point to make a motion to approve the fiscal year 2021 City of Tigard budget as proposed with amendments as have been discussed?
And if I may, Chair Roan, the amendments that have been discussed and approved thus far throughout the budget process this evening is approval of the technical adjustments as submitted by staff, the adjustment for police services as also submitted by staff, and then an additional $5,000 to the community services program within the general fund to support the Hotspot program.
And the parks amendment?
The parks actually was approved from the expenditure standpoint, affirmed the budget as proposed.
Okay, thank you.
This is Tim Cadman. I'd like to move to approve the budget as proposed with the amendments as outlined by Toby.
Okay, we have a motion. Is there a second?
Council President Goodhouse, second.
Thank you. Liz, would you please take a roll call vote? If you're in favor, please say yes. If you are not in favor, please say no.
Siobhan,
Yes.
Counselor Anderson,
Yes.
Chris,
Yes.
Counselor Lube,
Yes.
Tim,
Yes.
Counselor Goodhouse,
Yes.
Leah,
Yes.
Mayor Snyder,
Yes.
Cliff,
Yes.
Counselor Newton.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, everyone. The budget recommendations and motions are approved. I want to thank you all for your patience and understanding. This has been quite an awkward type of budget committee meeting for those of you. In fact, everyone's been to last year's or suffered through it in person. This has been difficult. It's been longer than it might have been because we've stopped to take roll for everyone at a number of different spots during the discussions to make sure that everyone had a chance to be heard. I appreciate that very much, and I appreciate your patience with me. Thank you all. And at this point, if anyone has any final comments, please let us know.
Cliff, I want to thank you for the job that you did this year. You did a tremendous job leading us through this odd time, so thank you.
I concur. You did a great job. This is Counselor Newton.
Thank you.
Yeah.
If
Agreed.
thank you. If there are no further final comments, then I'll just pause for about 10 seconds in case anybody else has any comments. Okay, thanks again. The Budget Committee meeting is adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a great night.
You too. Bye-bye. you.